LWO1 WeatherNet. Liftoff conditions looking pretty good.
ESTS is ready for launch.
Ignition. Liftoff.
Falcon 9 has cleared the tower.
Ten, 9, 8,
Side booster ignition.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Let's listen and watch in as we lift off from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida.
T-minus 15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition.
We are T plus 43 seconds into flight. Falcon 9 has cleared the tower and is currently throttling down to prepare for max Q at around the T plus 1 minute and 12 second mark. Max Q is where the vehicle will experience the highest amount of aerodynamic pressures.
Falcon 9 is supersonic. Max Q.
And we've just passed max Q. That is a really cool tracking shot of Falcon 9. All is looking good with the stage 1 trajectory. In about a minute, we have 3 events coming up in quick succession. First up is main engine cutoff. That's where the 9 engines on the first stage will shut off, followed by stage separation, where the first and second stages will separate from one another. Shortly after that, we'll have second engine start 1. The Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage will ignite its engine and continue its journey into orbit.
MVAC engine chill has begun.
We're about 20 seconds away from main engine cutoff, the start of those 3 events happening in rapid succession.
Main engine cutoff.
Stage separation confirmed.
Coming up in a few seconds, we should have the fairing deploy.
MVAC ignition.
Bearing separation confirmed.
And there you can see the 2 fairing halves have separated and fallen away from the vehicle, exposing the 143 spacecraft to the vacuum of space. And as a reminder, our recovery vessel, Miss Chief, will be attempting to recover the fairing halves today from the water. We're at T plus 3 minutes and 30 seconds into flight. We have a couple of views on screen right now. On the right-hand side is a view of the second stage, specifically the MVAC engine. It's currently in the first of its 2 MVAC burns. This burn should last for about another 5 minutes or so. And on the left-hand side of your screen is a view from the top of our first stage looking down. The next milestone for the first stage will be its re-entry burn. Falcon 9 needs to execute an entry burn to slow itself down before hitting the dense parts of the atmosphere. Without this burn, relying on the atmosphere alone to slow Falcon 9 down will put unnecessary strain on the rocket. And that entry burn is coming up at around the T plus 7 minute and 47 minute mark, just a few minutes from now. For those just joining us, this is the Transporter-1 mission for SpaceX, the first dedicated SmallSat Rideshare Program mission, and it's also the 3rd mission of 2021. We're just waiting on the next major event for this mission, which is the first stage entry burn that's going to be happening around the T plus 7 minute and 47 mark. You can see some periodic bursts of gas from the first stage. That is nitrogen from our attitude control systems. They help to orient the first stage as it continues to make its descent back towards Earth.
Stage 1 FTS is saved.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
And there's the entry burn. 3 of the 9 Merlin engines have relit. This burn is expected to last for about 30 seconds.
Second stage internal guidance.
Stage 1 entry burn shut down.
And you can see on screen the entry burn has concluded. And in just a few seconds, we should be hearing the call out for second engine cutoff, where we'll shut down the second stage MVAC engine.
FTS is saved.
There's the second stage.
Also signal stage 1, Cape expected.
The second stage has shut down its engine. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we are going to be attempting to recover the booster for a 5th time.
Nominal parking orbit insertion.
On our drone ship. Of course, I Still Love You. The first stage has 1 more burn left, the landing burn, and it begins just before we touch down and provides the booster with a soft descent before we land. That should be starting up anytime now. And we did get confirmation of the second stage that it did reach a good parking orbit. Once again, that is the 5th time for this particular booster and the 73rd recovery of an orbital class rocket. A great way to start off the mission and a great way to start off the Sunday. We're now going to coast for the next 45 minutes or so while we wait for SES-II, or second engine start number 2. We're going to leave you with an animation that shows you where we're at in the coast phase, and we'll see you back here at the T plus 54 minute mark. back to the Transporter-1 mission. If you're just joining us, Falcon 9 lifted off at 10 a.m. Eastern from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, had successful stage separation. We landed our first stage on our drone ship for the 5th time and successfully completed our first second stage burn. On screen right now is a view of the second stage MVAC engine. We are waiting to relight that engine for the second and final burn. This burn will be a quick one, lasting only 2 seconds. And we're expecting that burn to start in just a few seconds here. And there is second engine startup and then cut off. Now we're waiting for confirmation of a good orbit on that second stage.
Nominal payload orbit insertion.
And there's the call out that we want. That is a confirmation of a good orbit. Next up will be the deployment of our 133 spacecraft on board the mission, which will occur over an 18-minute period. And as a reminder, today's mission is the first dedicated SmallSat Rideshare Program mission. We created this program to provide small satellite operators with regularly scheduled rides on board Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy, and in the not-too-distant future, Starship as well. For today's ride shares, there are 11 ports on our payload adapter responsible for sending 133 spacecraft plus our 10 Starlink satellites. First up, the deployment sequences for port C4 and C1 will be initiated at the T+ 58 minute and 30-second mark. On port C4, there are 36 Planet SuperDoves, and then there are 17 spacecraft aboard Kepler's port on port C1. And we're hoping to get
Ports C4 and C1 deployment sequences initiated. AF-10 payload deployed.
And there you heard the callouts. 3 CubeSats aboard Maverick's Mercury dispenser have deployed. These are for NASA's Small Spacecraft Technologies Program VR3X mission. The next call out will be to start deployment sequence for our customer nanoracks around the T+ 1 hour and 8 minute mark. And while we wait for this deployment sequence to begin, we're going to leave you with views of the deployments for Planet and Kepler. And we'll see you back here at the T+ 1 hour and 7 minute mark. Welcome back to the webcast for Transporter-1, SpaceX's first dedicated SmallSat Rideshare Program mission. On board this mission are 143 spacecraft, the most spacecraft ever deployed on a single mission. If you're just joining us, Falcon 9 had an on-time liftoff at 10 a.m. Eastern from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. It followed a nominal trajectory after liftoff. The first stage landed for the 5th time on our drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You, and our second stage had 2 successful engine burns. So far, the deployment sequence has begun for 36 of Planet's CubeSats, as well as the 17 spacecraft aboard Kepler's port. If you're looking closely at the left half of your screen, you should see them in the background being deployed from the payload. We're expecting those to be completed around the T+1 hour and 9-minute mark. We've also deployed 3 CubeSats for our customer Maverick. We're now waiting to hear that the deployment sequence has started from port C3 for the 9 spacecraft for NanoRac's EAR-1 mission. And while we're waiting for that call out, the white dot on the left-hand side of your screen, that is the moon. It's pretty cool shots of the moon there. And there goes another satellite. Again, we're waiting for confirmation from the team for the 9 spacecraft for NanoRac's
deployment sequence initiated.
EAR-1 mission. And there's the confirmation for the 9 spacecraft. We're expecting to get confirmation that these have completed deployment in about 8 minutes from now once we pass through our ground station blackout period, so stay tuned for that.
Also signal Bangalore as expected.
Next up, we're expecting to get the confirmation that the 36 of Planet's Super Doves have deployed, as well as the 17 spacecraft aboard Kepler's port. And we did get that call out. So far, we've successfully deployed 56 of our 133 SmallSat Rideshares today. 9 spacecrafts have started their deployment sequence and should wrap up in the next few minutes, leaving another 68 still yet to be initiated. And welcome back once again to the Transporter-1 mission. We're in the middle of deploying 133 SmallSats for commercial and government customers. We're expecting to reconnect with the ground station in just a few seconds.
Acquisition of signal Cordova.
Deployments confirmed on ports C3, B3, C5, B1, and C6. Port B2 deployment sequence initiated and confirmed. Port A4 deployment confirmed. Port A2 deployment confirmed. Port B2 deployment sequence complete.
It sounds like we've gotten all the callouts. I'm going to go ahead and recap all of the different ports. So from port C3, the NanoRac's EAR-1 mission's 9 payloads have deployed. From port B3 and B2, the ExoPort-1 spacecraft deployed with 2 ICE-I radar imaging satellites aboard, and ExoPort-2 with 28 spacecraft from the DLR ICE-I Nano Avionics Swarm, and TU Dresden began its deployment. From port C5 and C6, deployed 1 SmallSat each for our customer Capella. From port B1, the Spaceflight Incorporated customer's IQPS satellite has also deployed. And from port A4, Spaceflight Incorporated's Sherpa FX-1 spacecraft has deployed with its 13 spacecraft on board. From port B2, the final SmallSats for EXO launch have now deployed, making for a total of 30 on today's mission. And from port A2, D-Orbit's Pulse mission with its 20 spacecraft on board has also deployed. And that will conclude the rideshare portion of the mission. With these deployments behind us, we are now going to enter another short coast phase before deploying our 10 Starlink satellites. So sit tight, enjoy the music, and we'll be back at the T+ 1 hour and 30-minute mark. We'll see you then.
Acquisition of signal, Pogo.
Welcome back to the webcast for SpaceX's Transporter-1 mission. If you're just joining us, we are close to the end of today's mission, which launched this morning from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida at 10 a.m. Eastern. We then had two successful ignitions and shutdown of the second stage Merlin vacuum engine, then successful deployment of our 133 spacecraft for our commercial and government customers. We were also able to successfully recover our first stage for a fifth time on our drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You, and recover both fairing halves from the water. Coming up, we'll have the deployment of our 10 Starlink satellites. It's going to be the first set of Starlink satellites deployed to a polar orbit, and that should be happening in about 30 seconds. And there's a view of the second stage. That right there is a view of the Starlink satellites to the right-hand side. It looks like we lost a signal on the second stage. Hopefully we can get that back. If we don't have views of the second stage, we should get confirmation via the callouts of deployments of those.
Partial data back from New Hampshire.
And there goes the 10 Starlink satellites, the first set to go to a polar orbit. With those 10, that is 143 spacecraft deployed on a single mission, the most ever. Pretty awesome. With that said, that will be bringing our webcast to an end. We would like to thank all of our rideshare customers for their support on today's mission. We'd also like to thank the United States Air Force for range support, as well as the Federal Aviation Administration for licensing. Continue to follow us on SpaceX.com for future missions and milestones, as well as our Twitter and Instagram profiles. And if you are excited about what you've seen today and want to join our team, visit SpaceX.com/careers to learn more about working at SpaceX. Thank you to all of our viewers for your continued support, and have a wonderful rest of the day.